Deep in the underground vaults of ancient Carthage, behind 3 locked bronze doors, sat a single crystal vessel filled with a rare, intoxicating fragrance that money could not buy. For years, wealthy noblemen traveled from across the Mediterranean, offering fortunes, ships, and land just for a single drop of this liquid. The keeper of the vault never sold it, never praised it, and never begged anyone to admire its scent. But the moment a sudden fire broke out in the city and the vault keeper abandoned the vessel to save his own family, leaving the crystal container sitting unattended in the open square, something bizarre happened. The nobleman who had obsessed over it for years suddenly walked past it without giving it a second glance. The moment the vessel was no longer guarded, held out of reach, and treated as priceless, its psychological aura vanished instantly. Why does human desire operate on this cruel, inverted paradox? Why does a woman who treated your devotion with cold indifference suddenly panic the exact second she senses that you no longer need her to feel whole? And what is the hidden, unsettling realization that takes place inside her mind when she realizes that your quiet exit was not a temporary emotional tactic, but a permanent, unshakable decision? Most men spend their lives operating under a fatal romantic illusion. You believe that if you constantly demonstrate your loyalty, if you check on her every morning, if you solve all her problems, and if you make her the undisputed center of your universe, she will appreciate your value. You tell yourself that by proving you cannot live without her, you are offering her the ultimate gift of devotion. Let that sink in. In reality, you are unconsciously handing her a pair of emotional scissors and begging her to cut your cords. When a woman realizes that your mood, your happiness, your self-esteem, and your daily peace depend entirely on her approval, something quiet and dangerous shifts inside her perception. She stops viewing you as an anchor, a protector, or a pillar of strength. She begins to view you as an emotional dependent, a man who needs her more than she needs him. And because human nature is biologically programmed to seek strength rather than shoulder another person's weakness, her respect for you begins to erode. First goes her respect. Then goes her fascination. And finally, her affection vanishes into thin air. To see what happens when a man shatters this dynamic by stepping into absolute independence, look at a forgotten, electrifying story from the reign of Emperor Trajan. There was a distinguished Roman commander named Tiberius Claudius, whose wife came from one of the most powerful patrician families in Rome. For nearly a decade, Tiberius indulged her every whim. He bought her villas in Pompeii, tolerated her sharp tongue, and spent his evenings attempting to soothe her endless complaints and emotional distance. Tiberius believed that if he just showed more patience, she would eventually treat him with warmth. She didn't. She grew colder, more demanding, and treated his presence as an inconvenient chore. One evening, after returning from a long military campaign, Tiberius sat down at the dinner table. His wife immediately began her usual routine of cold passive-aggressiveness, mocking his simple military habits and making passive comments about how superior her family's status was compared to his. In the past, Tiberius would have apologized, tried to explain himself, or spent hours trying to win back her smile. This time, Tiberius didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He slowly placed his eating utensils on the table, wiped his hands with a linen napkin, looked at her with a calm, pleasant, yet totally distant expression, and said quietly, "I have provided you with honor, wealth, and safety. But I have realized that my peace of mind is not something I am willing to trade for your approval. Let that sink in." Tiberius stood up, walked into his study, packed a single leather bag with his personal journals and military armor, and moved into the military barracks on the edge of the city. He didn't text her through messengers. He didn't ask mutual friends about her. He didn't check if she was angry or sad. He returned his full focus to training his legion and governing his territory. Look at what happened inside his wife's mind over the next 30 days. For the first 3 days, she was furious. She assumed Tiberius was playing a foolish game, waiting for her to call him back so he could apologize on his knees. She told her noble friends that he would return within a week, begging for forgiveness. A week passed. Tiberius did not send a single letter. 2 weeks passed. Word reached the city that Tiberius was thriving in the barracks, hosting dinners for his officers, working with total focus, and looking healthier and calmer than he had in 10 years. He wasn't acting out of anger, he had simply moved on with his life. By the third week, the wife's arrogance transformed into absolute, terrifying panic. She realized a brutal truth that shattered her entire world: Tiberius hadn't left her to punish her. He had left because he genuinely no longer needed her presence to be happy. His value wasn't tied to her validation. He had stepped back into his own power as a man. She stripped off her expensive jewelry, put on a simple traveling cloak, and walked through the dusty military camp herself, something a patrician noblewoman had never done in Roman history, just to stand outside his tent and ask if she could sit beside him again. This historical dynamic reveals the first master law of emotional sovereignty: a woman cannot truly value your presence until she realizes that you are fully capable of enjoying your absence. When you stop needing a woman, you aren't being cruel, cold, or malicious. You are simply removing the unnatural pressure you were placing on her shoulders. No woman wants to be responsible for a grown man's fundamental happiness. When you make her your sole source of joy, you transform her from a partner into an idol. And when you worship someone, you force them to look down on you. The moment you reclaim your independence, the moment you reignite your purpose, hit the gym, build your goals, and master your internal world, the dynamic flips completely. She realizes that your attention was never a cheap, guaranteed right, it was a high-value privilege that you grant only where respect is returned. Consider the second master law: the moment she senses that you are no longer emotionally controllable, her psychological leverage disappears into thin air. Look at the psychological experiment conducted by the ancient Stoic master Musonius Rufus with his young disciples. Musonius brought a wild, aggressive hunting hound into the courtyard. He held out a piece of fresh meat in his hand. The hound barked frantically, jumped on its hind legs, whined, and performed every trick it knew, completely at the mercy of Musonius's hand. Musonius then dropped the meat into an iron box, locked it, and placed the box on the ground, walking over to sit on a bench across the courtyard to read his scrolls. At first, the hound ran around the iron box, scratching at the metal, barking furiously, and looking at Musonius to see if he would open it. Musonius didn't even look up from his scroll. He remained completely absorbed in his philosophy, indifferent to the dog's noise. After 20 minutes of getting zero reaction, the hound stopped barking. It sat down quietly near the bench, lowered its head, and watched Musonius with deep, intense curiosity. The hound was no longer trying to demand the food, it was fascinated by the absolute calmness of the master. Musonius looked at his students and said, "When you chase a person's favor, you are the hound barking at the hand. But when you become complete within yourself, you become the benchmark that others seek to align with." Let that sink in. When you stop reacting to a woman's emotional tests, cold shoulder, or passive-aggressive comments, you break her script. She expects you to ask what's wrong. She expects you to apologize for things you didn't do. She expects you to chase her reassurance. When you respond with calm, polite, unshakable indifference, when you continue your day with a smile, focus on your work, and show zero emotional disruption, she is forced to confront a terrifying reality. She realizes that her emotional remote control over your life has been permanently smashed. She realizes that you are a sovereign man who cannot be manipulated through guilt or distance. And that realization is the single most powerful catalyst for attraction known to human psychology. Up to this point, we have exposed the tragic illusion of needy devotion, Tiberius Claudius's historic reclamation of his dignity, and Musonius Rufus's profound demonstration of absolute emotional sovereignty. These truths expose the exact psychological shift that occurs when a man stops begging for validation and reclaims his internal foundation. When we continue into the second half of this script, we will step directly into the remaining master principles that reveal the subtle signs that she knows you're truly gone, how to handle her sudden attempts to test your new boundaries, and the ultimate daily Stoic practice that makes you permanently immune to female manipulation for the rest of your life. A high priestess walks through the marble columns of an ancient Mediterranean temple, carrying an earthen lantern containing a sacred, flickering flame that has burned continuously for over 30 years. Every visitor who enters the courtyard bows low, whispering prayers and attempting to catch a reflection of the light in their own eyes. But late one evening, a quiet, cloaked traveler enters the sanctuary, sits near the outer fountain, and closes his eyes in silent meditation. He doesn't look at the flame. He doesn't bow to the priestess. He doesn't ask for a blessing, nor does he seek to warm his hands near the altar. As the night grows cold, the priestess finds her eyes drifting away from the worshipping crowd, staring intensely at the one man who remains entirely unbothered by her light. This brings us directly to the third law of emotional independence. Fascination thrives in the presence of an unreadable, self-contained soul. When you spend every waking moment explaining yourself, justifying your decisions, or over-communicating your feelings to a woman, you strip away every ounce of mystery from your persona. You leave no room for her imagination to wander. She knows exactly where you are, exactly how you will react, and exactly what levers to pull to elicit an emotional response. You become an open book whose pages she has already memorized. Look at the psychological shift that occurs when you close the book and step back into quiet self-containment. When you stop over-explaining, when you stop seeking her approval for your daily choices, and when you handle your own challenges without needing her comfort, an undeniable tension fills the air. She begins to ask herself silent questions in the middle of the day. What is he thinking about right now? Why isn't he bothered by my distance? Has he found a new purpose, or has he simply outgrown me? By refusing to flood her with your availability, you allow her mind to invest time and energy into thinking about you. And in human psychology, the person you spend the most time thinking about inevitably becomes the person who holds the greatest psychological value in your life. Let that sink in. When you internalize this fundamental reality, every interaction in your life begins to carry a completely different weight. You no longer approach relationships from a state of emotional poverty, nervously checking to see if you are being approved of or chosen. Instead, you operate from a position of absolute internal abundance. You recognize that your value as a human being was established by your character, your discipline, and your relationship with virtue long before anyone else expressed an opinion about you. When a man carries this deep, silent self-sufficiency, it changes his posture, his voice, his eye contact, and his choices. He doesn't need to shout, posture, or play aggressive games to prove his strength. His calm presence speaks far louder than any words ever could. People around him, especially women, immediately sense that he is a man who cannot be bought with cheap affection or manipulated through emotional distance. They realize that his presence in their life is an intentional choice, not a desperate dependency, and that realization instills a profound, lasting level of respect that no amount of needy devotion could ever buy. Consider the fourth law. The ultimate test of your transformation occurs when she attempts to pull you back into your old patterns. Look at how the ancient Stoic statesman Seneca handled the subtle psychological games played by his political opponents in Rome. Seneca spent years building immense personal discipline, writing essays on emotional mastery, and practicing complete detachment from the volatile opinions of the Roman court. When corrupt politicians realized they could no longer sway Seneca with empty compliments or threats of exile, they changed their tactic. They began sending messengers with subtle, passive-aggressive gifts, inviting him to lavish banquets where they knew his principles would be tested, and dropping quiet rumors that he was becoming arrogant and unfeeling. Seneca saw right through their strategy. He recognized that his opponents weren't genuinely offering friendship, they were testing his resolve. They wanted to see if his philosophy was merely a superficial phase or if he had genuinely forged an iron mind. If Seneca reacted with anger, defensiveness, or eager compliance, he would prove that their opinions still held power over his heart. Seneca remained completely unbothered. He accepted their polite invitations when necessary, spoke with gentle grace, declined their gifts with quiet dignity, and returned immediately to his reading and writing without giving their games a second thought. When a woman realizes that you have detached, she will almost certainly send out psychological probes to test your new boundaries. She might send a cold, short message after days of silence. She might post something designed to make you jealous. She might drop a passive-aggressive comment about how much you have changed or how cold you have become. Do not fall for the trap. Do not get defensive. Do not write long paragraphs explaining why you pulled back. If you react with anger or emotional volatility, you prove to her that you are still wearing her leash. You show her that your detachment was just a cheap, temporary act designed to get her attention. Respond always with absolute, unshakable calm and composure. Treat her comments with polite indifference. Maintain your firm boundaries, protect your precious time, and keep your daily focus firmly fixed on your own personal path of growth. When she sees that her emotional probes bounce uselessly off your calm composure, her respect for your strength will be sealed forever. Now, step into the fifth and ultimate realization of emotional sovereignty. True freedom is not about making her want you, it is about realizing that your soul was already complete before she ever entered your life. Look at the timeless wisdom of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. Epictetus taught his students that every human being possesses an internal fortress, a sacred mental citadel that no external person can enter without permission. Within this fortress lies your reason, your virtue, your discipline, and your self-worth. When you live your life constantly seeking a woman's validation, you walk outside the gates of your own fortress and stand in the cold, begging a stranger to grant you shelter. You give her total authority over whether you feel worthy, powerful, or peaceful on any given day. Let that sink in. A true Stoic man turns around, walks back inside his fortress, and locks the heavy iron gate behind him. He realizes that a woman is meant to be a companion who walks beside him on his journey, sharing in his joy and respecting his boundaries. She is never meant to be the architect of his self-esteem or the master of his emotional stability. When a man truly reclaims his citadel, his relationship with loss changes completely. He no longer views the departure of another person as a tragic tragedy that destroys his world. He views it simply as a shift in circumstances, an event that carries zero power to diminish his internal character or stop his progress. He appreciates the beauty of what was shared, but he never compromises his dignity to hold on to a person who chooses to step away. When you reach this state of mind, you no longer walk away as a manipulative tactic to make her chase you. You walk away because you genuinely value your own peace of mind more than you value a toxic or unfulfilling relationship. You detach not to change her behavior, but because you have changed your own standards. This internal shift is the exact difference between a man playing mind games and a man who has achieved genuine Stoic sovereignty. The game player anxiously watches his phone to see if his strategy worked. The sovereign man has returned to his own center, deeply engaged in building his character and mastering his mind. And that is the moment of absolute liberation. Whether she realizes her mistake and returns with deep respect, or whether she disappears forever into your past, your peace remains entirely unshaken. You stand tall in your own truth, grounded in your own strength, and sovereign over your own destiny. Stop begging for small crumbs of attention from those who treat you as an option. Stop trading your sacred self-respect for cheap, temporary affection. Reclaim your internal fortress, step back into your natural strength, and live your life like a man who truly belongs to himself. If you are ready to build an unshakable mind, master your emotional freedom, and step into the true power of a sovereign soul, do not turn back into old habits. Subscribe right now to the Stoic Path for another similar content. Master your mind, hold your boundaries, and walk your path with absolute power today.